Okay,
we're
let's
good.
start.
And let's roll.
Okay, good. So welcome to the archive of the Jewish Museum Vienna. This is where the magic happens, and we consider our archive as really the treasure, the heart of our museum. Although we have an exceptional collection of 3D objects and textiles, so really Jewish material culture, ritual art, I think the archival holdings really are not only an additional, but something standing in their own right regarding complementing the collection. So you can have a first peek here. You will see this is how we organize the archive. This is one part. There's another storage facility in the cellar, because I think what makes Jewish museums collection different, for example, from fine art museums, is that we have a wide range of materials. So we deal with paper objects, we deal with textiles, we deal with silver, we also deal with photographs because we get a lot of family documentation, etc. And of course, the most important question is, how do we store everything according to conservatory questions? In general, as you can see here, up there, this is our backup storage. We arrange, first of all, everything we use, the materials, is acid-free. That's very important, especially when you deal with paper objects, paper documents, and photographs. Here we have our little storage for Archivmaterial, archival material. And you can see we have these folders. All of them get inventory numbers and a location number. That's quite important. And this is matching with a database. So every item that comes in and we work on it gets an inventory number and a location.
If I may interrupt, Daniel, I have a question.
Yeah.
How are structured the numbers, basically? How do you define what number goes to a file?
Yeah, it's a chronological system. Of course, we try to arrange according to topics, but when it comes to the inventory number, I have to take the next one that's coming up in the database.
And this is generated how? By date? Basically, is it starting with the year and
no, it starts with inventory number 1.
Okay.
Yeah, and we come back to this because we'll also quickly discuss the first Jewish museum, because we still have holdings of the first Jewish museum. But when something comes in, I say new inventory number, and the next chronological number pops up. Then is a very important question is of storage. And what we do is, as you can see also up here, we have different sizes of boxes. So the first order system is according to the size of the archival document that it goes into one of these boxes. And they have different sizes, and according to the sizes, the location is chosen either here, because I can show you that, for example, here we have boxes number 2. Yeah, so it's labeled, it's done by our conservator, Bettina Drexler. She's of great help, and she is with this institution for decades. But we also have, for example, graphic material, like prints or sketches, drawings, and if they have a particular size where they no longer fit in any of these boxes, we put it in the drawers. It's very important to put them out flat. Yeah, and again, everything is acid-free. We work with this silk paper, etc. And we have to be very careful and very precise with giving the inventory number, because the moment you have, a typo in the inventory number, it's impossible or very difficult to locate the object or the archival document again. But let's quickly go back on how we do things. Here in the first row, I still have a lot of holdings. They were here before I joined. I recently joined the Jewish Museum in spring this year. These are donations, purchases we haven't looked at. So they are still waiting to get into the inventory system, to get a location number, etc. But up here behind this door, they are safe. It's also a question of security things. And here we have 4 drawers where we store our archival material. And for example, we use different things for photographs, for example. So we have this special kind of like a tasche, like little bags, or if we decide, we give them in one of the maps. This is also an option, but it really always depends on the size. They might also go like in this beautiful little paper thingies, and then on the outside we always write in pencil. We never use anything else. We write the inventory number, and we also decided to write the location number, because it makes it quite easier when I get a lot of queries that a user wants to see a lot of archival documents. It's easier for me to already have the location number also on written on the outside of the object, because it's then also easier to get it back when after the visit I have to store the objects again. But what you can see here, for example, which looks very unprofessional, I only got it 2 days ago. A colleague of mine took it from Berlin. He was there, and it's a donation which came through the archive of the Jewish Museum Berlin to the Jewish Museum Vienna, because the family has Viennese roots and they want to have it in the Jewish Museum Vienna. I have to say, I haven't opened it yet. I will do it this afternoon together with Bedina, our conservator. It might be wild in there. I'm even a bit afraid to open it, I have to say. Here it goes. And I actually don't know what exactly is waiting for us inside. It's like Pandora's box. And we have the bubble paper, of course, for wrapping, and it includes, as I can see now, photo albums, probably. I don't know what's in there. So, you know, sometimes when we get these donations from families, we try to collect things that are connected to Vienna or to Austrian Jewish history. Sometimes it's a surprise, yeah? We don't know exactly, especially if they have not a very detailed list of their holdings, of how they collected, and it can be very, very personal objects as well.
Speaking of personal objects, as you know, like the purpose of the course that I'm teaching is about basically personal objects. So here, if you open the suitcase again, I can spot basically the typical kind of content you would have at a home, like a photo album and some objects. So how, like assuming you would start, what would you select? How would you basically the first general step would be to select what goes, what matters.
Actually, we don't throw anything out, I have to say. The moment we accept the donation, of course, we have a contract, so there's a legal agreement. We have a donation contract, and the first thing I will do when I open the suitcase again is that I will take the time and go through everything. Yeah? And then I will see if there is already a chronological order inside, if there is a specific, I don't know, logic going to this, if there are some handwritings that might be matching, etc. And then I would decide if I assign only one inventory number to this whole bunch, like to one font, or I decide to split it. I in general intend to give only one inventory number as long as everything belongs together, and then I would start to do it in a chronological way. And really I might make a difference between what is correspondence. Is it private correspondence? Is it business correspondence? Is it really family correspondence? And as an additional side, I would do the objects. But I would try to match these objects also in a timely manner to what we have in the holdings. Yeah? But again, it will be a surprise. The same applies to most of these folders here. Yeah? In general, an archive is basically an order system, but it's something, we are only the keepers. These are the things that don't, of course, legally belong to the Jewish Museum, but I think it's also they are witnesses of time, of history, yeah, and we are in charge to protect them, to make them accessible. That's very, very important to us. Everybody can contact us, and I'm happy to pull out archival documents or objects, whatever is needed. So there is a really a low entrance to our access. And in the future, we plan also to digitize more of these things, because so far, most of the archival documents are only partially digitized. We have this archive scanner. It's a professional one, because one has to be really careful, especially with handwriting ink. You can't simply use a normal copy machine. This is a scanner. I think it was purchased only a few years ago, according to the latest technical equipment. And we have here a program installed. We mainly scan them as TIFF files, 300 dpi, and then I send these scans by request to users. Yeah. It's not totally open access yet, because we also have sensitive materials, and according to the legal framework there's a statute of limitation. So I have all my users, first of all I need to know the framework, the concept they're working on, and then they sign a form, and I then submitting the files where we transfer. But the future is that we will put more and more of our material online. Yeah? What's a very beautiful, angle are these boxes, yeah. And again, you can see two different sizes of them. So we have the 4 and the 5, and they mainly hold our collection of photographs and postcards.
So if you scan photos, you would scan the front and the back. Would
Yes.
you have some sort of
Yes.
logic? How do you do that?
Yes, because sometimes you might find a handwritten note on the reverse, which may make it possible to identify a person. Maybe it's completely misleading, but I recently had a curator here from another collection, a private collection of a noble family, and only by the handwriting, and also because the handwritten note was written and transcribed in our database, we could identify one of the members of the noble family attending an auction in 1930 and sitting next to the director of the Metropolitan Museum, for example. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to identify that. I think what is very important about our institution, the Jewish Museum Vienna, that it was the first Jewish museum in the world. It was opened in 1895, and we have very important founding members. It first opened in the Rathausstraße, in the actually private home of Wilhelm Stiassny, a very important architect. What's really striking is that we still have about 2/3 of their collection holdings, and this also includes archival material. So what is really special about that is that, first of all, we also have copies of the old inventory books of the first Jewish museum. And what we will do as a next step, we also try to analyze the collection. So this involves, of course, again, silver objects and archival documents. And we can see from the silver objects that one of the collection focuses of the very first Jewish museum worldwide was Eastern European Judaica, which is not that exceptional in a way, because that was a brainchild of this time, because also the Museum of Applied Arts, which was founded a bit earlier, and with the Viennese School of Art History, they tried to collect from all people in the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. And of course, Galicia was part of it. Here I put out, these are the two inventory books. These are facsimile, because we have still the original first one, which I'm happy to show you. But when we work with it, we use the facsimile because it's very fragile. And although they don't look like much, also the original one, when it comes to monetary value, they have the most sentimental and scholarly value for us. And what we do, as you can see, there already have people been working on. So we have the first inventory numbers, and you can see from the script. So this is also something we have to deal with when you work in archives, the different handwriting, it's Kurrentschrift, etc. And what's quite striking is that, first of all, also how was it purchased or was it given? That's very important for us, because that also helps us with provenance research. And what's quite striking is that until I think inventory number 39 or maybe even later. No, it's even later, 49. Yeah, it's not Judaica in the common or in the inner sense. So it's not a ritual object. But what we have is actually a lot of old master prints. Yeah? And we know that they were given by a particular person. So for us, it's very interesting to research his context and maybe get a meaning of why he donated this, or why he thought that these old master prints are important for a Jewish museum. Only object number 49 is a Seder plate made of tin. And it's also the first object that was purchased. And it was purchased by M. Blumka, which was an antiquities dealer in Vienna. And his family still works in the art trade. They have a very beautiful, fancy old master paintings gallery in New York and sell to really important institutions worldwide. So what I prepared for you.
Sorry, Daniel, I have a question. So in this sort of register, you would have the numbers that you showed me earlier on the photos?
No, not necessarily. But what former colleagues of mine did is, in our database, they matched the old, if possible, they matched the old inventory number with the new one. Yeah. So in the 90s, when they reopened the museum, because in 1938, the first Jewish museum moved addresses several times until 1938. Then they were forced to close down. The collection was confiscated. Parts of it were exhibited in Vienna in a really anti-Semitic exhibition. And after 1945, the collection was restituted to the Jewish community. Yeah? And then they gave it as a permanent loan to the Jewish Museum Vienna when it reopened in the 1990s. And what the colleagues back then did, which was very important work, is they tried to match with these inventory books the holdings of the old, or now we call it the first Jewish museum. Because our collection holdings is not only the first Jewish museum, we also have on permanent loan the collection of the Jewish community, which holds mainly silver objects or textiles which were saved from the Viennese synagogues, which were destroyed in 1938. Another part of the collection is the private Judaica collection of Max and Trude Berger, but we also have an Antisemitica collection which was donated by Martin Schlaff, and parts of the postcard boxes you see here were part of his anti-Semitic collection. The original first inventory book of the first Jewish museum worldwide. And we hardly ever take it out because it's very fragile and a very important time witness, actually. And this is how it looks like. Inventory catalog. And here again, you can see, like in the facsimile, how it was arranged. So this is how it started, with a society for the collecting and preserving of Jewish material culture. I will show you now our database, so how times changed.
I'll let it roll, but anything that needs to be cut, if it's private or anything, you tell me, and then I'll just take it off, like such as passwords and.
So this is an example you can show because it's published also with how it was purchased, but don't show any prices or anything.
I don't see them.
You see them not now, but
okay.
So this is how it's organized. You get an inventory number, so this is something done automatically.
So that's the number that we saw earlier. That's
that's
kind of
the
assigned.
number we write with a pencil on the object itself, mainly on the reverse, and then also outside in the acid-free material. Unit, it's like, although this looks like there are many pages, it's an album. It's of drawings for Fanny and Nathan von Arnstein, an important salonier in Vienna in the 18th century. It's one object, so we put in here. For example, if we do an inventory of Torofinials, and it's a pair, we would put in here 2. The date it was registered, very important, the current location. So this is currently exhibited in our permanent exhibition on the 2nd floor. Old location, because this is where it will go back to, and GEM is it's our storage in the cellar, where it goes back to if the permanent exhibition would be changed or if this object is taken out. So this is actually where the object lives. Who did the inventory? It's a curator, Gabriele Kohlbauer-Fritsch. She's an expert on Salon and Ringstraßen culture. We have some categories and object types, but this is currently under discussion as we want to go online with parts of our collection, and the first part will be the first Jewish Museum, Vienna. Then we might rearrange categories. If this is an important object or it's already being asked to be seen by researchers or whoever, we make scans with our professional scanner and put them into the database, but we also store them on another server. And these are high resolution scans, especially the one we store on the other server, which might be used for publication, for example. Yeah? Then they also did it again for the drawings only, how it was purchased, and then we work with where was it made, to which collection does it belong. So is it the first Jewish museum? Is it the Jewish museum, which means objects donated and purchased after the reopening in the 90s? The material, technique, and we try to be as precise as possible. Measurements, date, if we know it, the condition. We also would put in, if it needs to go to the conservator, for example, how we purchased it, the amount of money, the insurance, and we also note if there is any correspondence, invoice, legal correspondence, if there's a contract. And then we have in this case a rather long description, yeah, with all the details, because all these people in this, it's a collection of drawings, are identified by the artist. There's also a bit of background on the artist. We work a lot with reference books, etc., to cross-check information. This is recent information I got from the Noble family regarding a liaison. And then at the end, we put in a field for literature if this object was ever published. That's quite important for us because it adds to the value, to the scholarly value of an object or an archival document. And if it was ever exhibited, and from when until when it left, for example, our house. So if we give it on loan, for example, to another museum, wherever, it's also documented here. So this is how our database is arranged.
Does the database include like video material, audio material?
No, we sometimes get audio and video material. This is something one of our curators is in charge of, and I know that he sends them to a mediathek. So we have a cooperation, and they store it according to the latest technological developments, so that we can always access it. But this is something that's done by a colleague of mine. Yeah.
So if I get it right, like if you get video or audio material, it's going to be outsourced to a company that's going to digitize it for you.
Yes.
According to specifications.
Yeah, and it's also stored there. It's not here in our buildings because you need a special conditions, climate, etc. So this is something I'm not really. We would, of course, we would make an entry in our database. We would give it an inventory number, but we would give us location mediathek. Yeah, and I would hand it over to the colleague who's in charge of these materials. In general, we try to be, first of all, you can search all these fields with basic search. That's very important to us because I get a lot of queries or telephone calls, but mainly emails from all over the world, people looking for mainly private individuals, so that I can search in all these fields for a name, for example, to make it as easy, accessible as possible. In general, I think that archives, you have this idea, especially in French philosophy, and Derrida and Foucault, they've written about it, but also highly influenced by Lacan and Freud, that an archive is like archaeological digging, yeah, and it's a very subjective matter, yeah. It's me or whoever does the researcher interpreting the material, and it might change according to ongoing scholarly discussions, but also according to a change of the zeitgeist, yeah. So what do we consider now as important might be totally different in 5 years, 10 years, a decade, yeah. And it makes it also very interesting, but it also, we need to keep in mind that the way we arrange nowadays our archive might not be how somebody else would do it. And our institution, the Jewish Museum Vienna, they did 2 really important exhibitions on archives. One of them was called Papier ist doch weiß. It was done by Werner Hannack in 1998. It was one of our first exhibitions. And it's really focusing on this very archive. And I think he did a great job focusing on what, first of all, the story of the reopening of Jewish Museum Vienna, but also important and striking examples, because you can always only show examples. You will never come to the very end in an archive. It's like the fond, as you say in French. You have this idea of the fond of the, in the sea. You never know what might come up later on. It's a very beautiful metaphor, I would say. And he chose, according to important biographies, important architects, but also what's important for the history of the Jewish community in Vienna. How far does it go back? How old are our archival materials? Who were important players when founding the first Jewish museum? What kind of iconography can you find in this graphic art, etc. The second exhibition, which played a bit more with this abstract idea of an archive and how you arrange something, was done on the archive of the Jewish community. And it was, I think it was 2007 and 2008, Ordnung muss sein. And it was done by Felicitas Heimann-Jelinek together with Ingo Zechner and Lothar Hölbling, and it really played with this idea of what actually is a system, what's an order, who does it and why, yeah? And it was really nicely done. These are the holdings of the Archive of the Jewish Community. That's different from our holdings, but it also raised important questions. We cooperate quite a bit with them because we get a lot of genealogical queries. So there is the records office of the Jewish community, and there's a very nice colleague, and I refer people to her, especially when it comes to questions like date of birth. They also have a database on the cemeteries. A lot of information you can already find online. There's also websites like the findbuch.at, which is also helpful for provenance research. We also point people in this direction. So it's a whole, all these queries we get in an archive might be different.
If I may interrupt, because there's something when we prepared, when we had a talk earlier, and I mentioned that the conclusion of my course, and I think the conclusion in general is we need to have something on paper.
Yeah.
And I think this is proof the point that this is what you actually pull out. You didn't pull out a record on a computer.
Exactly.
So maybe you can extend that point and what specifically you think about that aspect in regards to your work here.
So I'm a very analog person, as I said, and this is also the reason why I prepared some of archival documents for you and your students, because it's one thing if I would show you the record or the entry in our database. It would be very abstract. It would not give you an idea of the aura of an object. It's like with artworks, yeah? I think it's still not sufficient to scroll through a website. You need to go, you feel the presence of a painting. It's also about emotions, yeah? And a lot of these documents also hold emotions. Although they might at first glance not look particularly, I don't know, precious or whatever. So I prepared a few things. This is something which is an excellent example. It's very private but important on a sentimental level, but also on a historical, and you will see why in a second. It was a recent donation by a family. Their aunt died, and in her safe, in her apartment, they found the following. It's a little textile with the so-called Judenstern, 2 of them, stitched on it. And it was her handwriting. She was in Theresienstadt and she wrote this short text on the day of the liberation. And it was really a touching and striking moment when I met her ancestors, because they told me how, first of all, they knew she was in Theresienstadt, but she never spoke about it. They only found these materials. There are some documents coming with this textile. But when they came here with the lawyer and they spoke about the aunt, it was so lively, it was so positive, because she put it in the safe and she kept on living, and she was apparently a lady. She always drove with a chauffeur, and she put it completely aside and had a beautiful life. And the last time they spoke to her, she became ill in her late, I think, 80s. She was in her bed and was still watching the opera ball on television, and remembered that she was opening the opera ball in her youth in Vienna. And it was really something very special to me. Yeah. And it's important. It's an important object for our collection as well. Yeah, because there's a personal story attached. We have all the details. We did a lot of research also, and we discovered things even the family didn't know. We checked with the records office of the Jewish community, and they were very happy to learn more about the family past.
So that specific object has been scanned?
No, this we will have photographed, because textiles we don't scan, we photograph them.
Sorry, I'll repeat because I cut you. So
yeah,
was that object been scanned?
We scanned the paper documents, but not the textile. The textile will be photographed at some point. Yeah.
Can you, if you know, can you describe the process of photographing an object?
Yeah, we work with an excellent photographer. So the having it photographed means, first of all, this is a part that it's not actually part of the archive. When we have 3D or textiles photographed, it's the collection managers, they are in charge. They normally prepare a list, approach the photographer. We know him quite well. It's very important to always work with the same color background, so that it's in a very organized and calm way, so that really the object comes out. And I think they normally do it once a year, but now we will have a big session in autumn for our textile project. But this is not part of the archive, it's part of collection management.
Do you know the specifications of how the photos are photographed, like in what kind of resolution?
I worked for a private collector a decade, and we used actually the same photographer for our objects, and he normally provided 3 different kinds of resolution. One that was really we could use if we wanted to make a poster of the object, and one of a small size we could save in our database, and something in the middle for catalog publication. Yeah. A typical object, or a beautiful one, have things like that. Yeah, so this is something that's quite precious. One can open it. And it's again, Ringstraße is a very popular topic, Vienna around 1900. And here you can identify individuals who were quite important for Jewish community, but also for Austrian culture. So it's also very important to always consider the connecting points and the interaction can be in architecture, in the fine arts, in philanthropy, and the contribution of Jewish society to Austrian culture. Yeah. So this is something, one of our, this is from the Tedesco family, and you can see one can do a lot of genealogical research. If there were marriages between important families, one can link them to their palais, the palaces on the Ringstraße, one can match architects. We would always cross-check with our other archival holdings if we have any correspondence on them, etc. But this is one of the, high-end objects we have, and it's completely different in its character from the Judenstern I just showed you, and you would never be able to say which one is more important. Yeah. And you see it's so this is how it's stored. Yeah, this is something I will not go into detail, but this was part of a donation by the Efrussi family, because we had a big exhibition on the Efrussi and this famous book, The Heir of the Amber Eyes. And it includes correspondence, but it also includes recipes for Salzburger Nockerl. So you will never know what you find, especially in a family archive. Yeah? It might also include correspondence with other families in banking, in business, etc. Yeah, this is something quite striking, because you wouldn't expect it in a Jewish museum. It's Old Master prints of New Testament images. And as I said earlier, when we looked at the first inventory books, we just need to figure out in which context they were collected. But you can see it's Parmigianino, it's the big important names. We have an album on Raphael prints, for example. And we still have to figure out where they exhibited, what's the purpose of that. Yeah, but it's very, very interesting. But we think it has also to do with the story of the Viennese School of Art History, because there were quite some links with the founding members of this museum. I'm just wondering what I pull out here. Can't remember.
But on the purely technical part, it's very interesting to see that you have this system. With the numbers here,
the numbers
probably
and the location. It's very helpful. I prefer it to be in a chronological order, and also try in the drawers to keep it in a chronological order, especially when you're talking about big deep boxes. You can't see here, they are in our cellar storage, because if you look for only one sheet of paper and it's not in a chronological order, you need to go through the whole box, yeah, and it's very time consuming. Yeah. This is something the first Jewish museum collected a lot, portraits of famous Jewish, mainly men, I'm afraid. And this is also reflected in the old inventory books. Yeah.
And here again we see like the sort of the structure, the way you keep every print safe from like being glued to each other.
Yes. So we always have this kind of paper in between. And it's also when you start to look into a new donation, that you any sticking points, so something like the sticky notes, don't ever use it on old archival material, because they will go, they will destroy the structure of the paper, yeah, and they might take parts of it out. So we now use this rubber gloves. They are quite useful. Up until a few years, they used the white ones made of textile, but we now know that you have much more, sensitivity, because you feel quite better with this one. And we also know that the big auction houses in the manuscript departments, they also work with this kind of gloves that recently changed.
So in short, you will recommend these plastic gloves over the one made of textile?
Yes, absolutely. And you can purchase them in any, pharmacy shop or wherever, so they are not expensive. Yeah, and you can throw them away after one usage. And every visitor who comes and wants to see something, I really force them to put them on. What's also quite important when speaking about photographs, this is a postcard. I just wanted to show, but it applies even more to a photograph. Never touch it like that, yeah, because on our fingers we have, it's called butterfett, it's like butter. It really destroys the surface. And I've chosen this really an awful example, but I've chosen it because in the last inventory book of the first Jewish museum, I think not the very last, but one of the last object was a poster of this very anti-Semitic exhibition in Vienna, and still it entered the collection. Yeah, it was a propaganda anti-Semitic exhibition organized in
Maybe
Germany.
that touches on the point of what you keep and what you decide to keep for an archive.
Exactly, because you can never know, it might become of importance at some point. Here we have a photograph, and it's the first. It was the second curator of the first Jewish museum, Jakob Bronner. The first one was his brother Maurice. And you can see on the reverse, we also scanned the reverse. So in former times, they put the stamp of the museum. We no longer do that. The inventory number in pencil, location number, and this is in shortcut written. It seems to go back to the first Jewish museum. I'm not sure, I can read it a bit. It should be actually transcribed in our database. So every language, we really try to translate, transcribe it, and put all the information available, because there you can search it.
And Daniel, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you, and if you do, how is it when you get digital photos, basically photos sent by email, and that would enter to the collection?
No.
This never happens because this is not an original.
Exactly. Yeah, we don't do that. Yeah. So sometimes, if it's interesting material, what I did when I took over, I went through all the material my predecessors collected. And what I do is, I might print it out. I would always print it out. Yeah, it would not get an inventory number. Yeah, because it's not an original. But what I try to do is, if there is additional information on any of the documents, or imagine our database, I write the inventory number here and put printouts, copies, etc. In an additional file. And I would make a note in the database that there's an object file with Daniela in the archive. That's quite helpful actually when curators are looking for information for an exhibition, for example. Then they can come to me and we might have something. So because you don't need to start from scratch each time, the former colleague might have already looked into, I don't know, these are copies from the State Archive, for example, Declaration of Jewish Assets. So this is how I back up such things. And I think in the future we have to think also in an abstract way of what is necessary to document and what not. Yeah? So what's chit-chat and what really can create historical value, which can be or needs to be researched in a century.
So on the level of a private database, somebody who is dealing with his own family history, he or she needs to approach the subject the same way.
Yes, yes. And I mean, I'm not on Instagram or Facebook or anything, so I'm really an old-fashioned person when it comes to that. But I think from friends, I know, I personally, I think it's important. I mean, I take photos, for example, when I travel, even on my iPhone, I have to admit, but I always arrange them according to date, location, but I always go through them and don't keep everything, yeah? Because otherwise we are really, I mean, it's also a question of the environment. Where does all this data go? Will it be accessible in 10 years' time, etc. Yeah? And these are the next big questions. What will happen, even to us as archivists, if AI takes over? Yeah, what does it mean? I don't know yet, yeah, but this will be very important issues to raise, also for a museum and for every private collector or archivist.
So for you, the selection process would be probably immediately after you take the few photos, this is when you decide, okay, what to keep and
Yes.
what not?
Yes. So the latest, when I'm arriving back home, I connect them to my computer and put it in on my computer. I'm really not good with these technical things. I always have to ask other people. Save it and put a label on a folder, and that's it. But it's very basic. But I know when I did my PhD thesis, I'm a trained art historian. I worked a lot with photo archives on a digital way, which I created for myself because it's many years back. And I created little folders, but I also printed them out. I have to say, like an inventory card of, I don't know, amulets from Carpathian region, amulets from Galicia, amulets from Krakow, etc. So I would always, find a common, a typology and iconography, depending on the research you do. But I think that applies to every archive, to every holding. One has to first of all look for all the material and then think of what makes sense and what's my purpose and what's my question to the material. That, I think, creates these folders or the labeling.
And if I may add, I think for me at least is to think about who's going to take over and how is it going to take over. Meaning, you create a database. I'm talking about like a private database now. The core idea should be, okay, how I'm going to be able to pass that on.
So I worked as a researcher for a private Judaica collector here in Vienna for a decade. And with the archival holdings in his collection, we really started almost from scratch, opening drawers and just looking what's there. And I did it in a similar way. So I tried to arrange them according to topics, but it was also very important to be in a constant personal conversation with him. What's his question to his holdings? Why did he purchase these things, or why did he collect those? And
how do you pass it on to the next?
So only after I got a decent overview of all the holdings, I started to enter them in a database. And for me, it was always very important. I would recommend it to any student, to any private collector, archivist, etc., organizing a family archive, to really make sure that you catch all the names of individuals, places in the document. Because then you can search it, and that makes it also accessible for future generations. So because only later on in the process of inventorizing this collection, we then decided to make collection catalogs. Only then we decided to have flat materials scanned, 3D objects photographed, so that we can illustrate them and make it accessible to scholars and to the museum world and students. But when I handed over, when I left the collection, for me it was key, and also for the collector himself, that my predecessors who work there now can find everything in the database with one click.
So for the general user, when you mean database, I don't know that specific person uses a custom-made database, or is it something off the shelf that you can buy or find?
You can start with a simple Excel spreadsheet, but it goes up to really professional museum collection databases. It's also a question of money and the funding you have. We have a very basic one, but I find it still very, very useful. One can define the fields, which one fills out, but you can also start with Excel, because when we worked with a similar version at the private collection, behind all this is always the Excel spreadsheet, and it's searchable. And you can also, Excel, it might sound boring, but it's quite useful, because you can, arrange it according to dates, according to the chronology of inventory numbers, of who was the person working on it, etc. So that's actually quite useful.
So the core, if I may kind of sum up, is what the document is called. It has like
a title
and a definite number that's unique.
Yes, that's unique.
And that's basically what defines the whole structure.
Yes, and the location is also very important. These, I would say, are the three key elements. And I will always advise, as I said, to give names as clearly as possible, especially when working with archives which cover material not only in German language. For example, I also worked a lot with Hebrew, but also Eastern European languages. It's very important, search-wise, that you give the different kinds of transliteration, because there's a difference between English, German style, and that's also very useful. But in the future, I just recently learned, everybody can use Wikidata, and there you have a correct spelling of, for example, Lemberg, Lviv, Lvov, etc. So this is actually a good thing for the future, that with one click you can actually access however you wrote this very name of the town. Because in the past we had really difficulties when researching Eastern European Judaica. People might label it as Eastern European, Galician, former Russia, Poland, etc. Or they even might have a specific town name. But if you don't, where to start and how to make sure that you catch everything which is in one database or in one collection. So I think this is really to the point that in the future there will be some thesauri, for example, also when it comes to spelling, which will be very useful for mankind and all researchers. For me, as I said in the very beginning, an archive, it's the heart and the treasure of a museum, or of any institution actually, because it teaches us so much about holdings, about history, about individuals, also on a personal level. But I think one can maybe, up to a certain extent, compare it to a cabinet of curiosities, because you need a lot of curiosity when you work in an archive, and if you're a researcher or a curator, because there is never a straight answer. And as we said, with the spelling or with research queries or questions, you might use a different angle and you get additional results. And I would also call it a cabinet of wonders, like a Wunderkammer, because one always learns. I learn every day from, I don't know, whatever I look up, from every new donation we get another small perspective of this whole world. It's like tikkun olam, yeah, it's like this putting the things together, which is quite often actually the private and very personal motivation of collectors.
If you could sum up, or if you could give the big tip to somebody who is basically willing to start his own family archive, and with the hurdles that are basically going to come along the way, what would you basically tell that person? Curiosity and wonder and patience are the 3 key elements.